So, how many refugees are in the Harrisonburg area, and where are they from?
Oh boy, that's a complicated question. We've resettled refugees here for about 30 years or so. The first waves were people from Southeast Asia, Vietnamese, Laotian. Some of them stayed, some of them out-migrated to Canada and places, or to California, places like that. We think in the 30 years we've resettled about 3,500 refugees here in Harrisonburg area. Yeah. And it's a variety of people from the Southeast Asia people to people from the Middle East, particularly Iraqi refugees, Kurdish and Arabic Iraqi people. We have also steadily resettled people from Sudan, Congo, Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, to name a few places also. Mm-hmm.
Just do they go through in order to come to the U.S.?
So the refugee program in the world is run by the United Nations, okay? If you are declared a refugee by the United Nations, then there are 12 countries in the world that accept third country placement. Let me just walk through that, unpack that just a little bit, though. There are 3 criteria for becoming a refugee, and this is international law that all nations have subscribed to. The first is that you have to have a credible fear of persecution because of your race, your religion, ethnicity, language, those kinds of inherent human attributes, right? And it has to be credible. The second thing is you have fled your country to a second country. It's so bad, the militias are coming, they're shooting you, they're threatening you, and you've seen the damage that they're doing, and you fled for your life to another country, the adjacent country sometimes, right? And then what we call third country resettlement is when you fled to that second country and you cannot go back. That's, it's been 20 years and the war is still going, you cannot go back. And then if you're given refugee status, maybe a third country will resettle you. The U.S. is one of 12 countries that resettles refugees. But just to give you an idea of the magnitude of what's happening in the world today, the UN has, the last count was at least 40 million people that they consider to be refugees, had given refugee status to, and of those 40 million, only 100,000 are resettled in third countries every year. Now the U.S. does the bulk of that. The U.S. does about 70,000 a year, so it does a lot. Compared to other countries, it does a lot. But that's essentially the process. Now, let me just say one more thing. The U.S. government decides who they're going to take, right? They might say, as they said 2 years ago, there's a refugee camp of Congolese refugees in Rwanda who have been there over 20 years. So the U.S. made the decision that they will resettle those Congolese people who have been in that camp for that amount of time. So those Congolese people are being resettled now in these years, probably for another 2 or 3 years, in the United States. And there's about 15,000 of them. So it takes a while, to work through and to process all those people. But this was a decision that the United States government made. There are people in many other refugee camps that have been there 20 years, 30 years, and nobody's taking them. The UN says they're refugees, but for one reason or another, there's no country that will take them. And so they're there. They're just there, right? So it's a kind of a two-pronged process. The UN usually declares them refugees or not, and then a country like the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the other countries that do this will say, yes, we'll take them, or no, we won't. If they say yes, then the U.S. has a whole other set of vetting process, which is complicated, and 4 or 5 different departments of the federal government are involved, and it's a long, it takes 2 or 3 years to get here. Once the UN says you're a refugee, and the government has said, yes, we will consider taking these people.
So after they get here, what programs are available for them to be assimilated into the society?
Well, the first thing is just getting them housing. So the charge that we have from the federal government with the monies that we have, and we have about $925 a person to do this. So what we do is pretty basic, getting an apartment ready for them, furnishing it with basic furnishings, getting some food in it, So we use donated items from the community, right? Or if a church sponsors a family, that's great and helps with some of these things. Or sometimes we've had a group of students or other groups that have done this too. But that's the basic things, getting them housing, getting the children into the public schools. We have to get them an appointment at the health department here for basic medical screening. And we have to get them a social security card, and then employment is the big thing. Because you can do the math, $925 per person it's not going to pay you rent for a year. It's going to pay you rent for a month or so. Right, so.
Alright, so have you noticed any changes, both positive and negative, regarding the Harrisonburg community since it began welcoming refugees?
What I've noticed is a lot of new jobs that are being created, new restaurants, ethnic restaurants of all kinds, a variety of other businesses that have been started, some in the construction industry, some in landscaping, used car dealerships, just a variety of businesses like that have been started by refugees or immigrants into the community here. The unemployment rate here is very low. Many of the existing industries, some of the bigger food processing plants, some of the light manufacturing that we have here, the trucking that we have here, immigrants and refugees go into those industries and are helping to grow those industries too. So it's new jobs both in new businesses, but growing the existing businesses that are here.
Alright, so what do you think would happen if the U.S. would remove itself and its humanitarian aid from the Syrian refugee crisis now?
Would remove itself from
Yeah.
the Syrian crisis? Well, the U.S. is actually not doing very much to resettle Syrian refugees. The government said 2 years ago that they would resettle 15,000 Syrian refugees, and of that number, the U.S. has actually resettled only, I think it's maybe just 2,000 now, if it even is 2,000 of that number. That's low, and that's really slow too, in terms of resettling Syrians. So when you look at the magnitude of the number of people that are displaced from Syria, millions of people that have been displaced and have fled Syria, to have resettled 2,000 is a very small number of people. So the reality is that many of them are fleeing to Germany and Europe, or they're fleeing to Turkey, and they're just kind of sitting in all those countries: Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and then some countries in Europe that have taken, in the case of Germany, a fairly large amount of Syrian refugees. Yeah.
Alright, so do you think that the Syrian refugee crisis has overshadowed our refugee crises in the world?
Well, in terms of numbers, the Syrian refugee crisis is a pretty big crisis. We're talking of millions of people who have fled the country. But the Congo, for instance, is at least as big. There are actually more people that have fled Congo than Syria. Most of them are in other parts of Africa: Rwanda, Burundi. They've gone to Tanzania, Kenya. They've gone to South Africa, and just a variety of places around. And a few have gone to other countries and have been resettled by the U.S. But yeah, I mean, it's gotten a lot of press and publicity. I think that picture of that little 2-year-old boy, dead on the beach. That was just a heartbreaking kind of image, right? Of the loss and the pain. It kind of sums up what being a refugee is many times about. That kind of loss and pain. And you don't have those kinds of images coming out of some of the other places where there's been, again, lots of people fleeing, like the Congo, for instance.
Right, and do you see these crises ending anytime soon?
Well, if you go back to the basic definition of the word refugee, so you have a credible fear of persecution because of your race, religion, ethnicity, you fled your country, and you cannot return to your country in safety. Those 3 things, right? That's the basic definition. What causes that? It's war. It's always war. If there's an earthquake or something, people find a way to rebuild, and they don't necessarily flee. They may flee for a week or something, but they're going to come back because it's done. The event that caused that is over with. But when you have these wars that go on, and they're still fighting, and people don't feel safe. You can't plant crops because, in 3 months you might not be there to harvest your crop. And so you're just eking out a living of subsistence, right? And so as long as the wars continue, yeah, the refugee crisis will continue. If we can never learn to live in peace, then these things would diminish.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, sure, yeah.